The most feared man in the city was sitting alone on the day he expected to be loved. Alexander Blackwood had built an empire with his name, his influence, and his reputation. For years, people had looked at him and seen power. They saw the mafia boss who never hesitated, the man who could enter any room and command attention without saying a word. But on the day of his wedding, surrounded by hundreds of guests inside a grand Chicago ballroom, Alexander discovered that even the strongest image could disappear in a single moment. The music was playing softly. The lights were glowing above the elegant decorations. Everything had been prepared perfectly for the beginning of a new chapter. Yet one person was missing. The bride who promised to stand beside him was nowhere to be found. At first, Alexander waited quietly. He believed there had to be an explanation, a delay, a misunderstanding, something that would make sense. But as minutes turned into hours, the truth became impossible to ignore. The room that was supposed to celebrate love became a place filled with uncomfortable silence. Guests avoided his eyes. Conversations became whispers. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Blackwood felt something his power could not fix. He felt abandoned. Months earlier, Alexander had been known as a man who had everything. His mansion overlooked the city, his business influence reached across the country, and people respected his decisions. But after a serious accident changed his life and left him unable to walk, everything around him began to feel different. The world that once admired his strength suddenly focused on what he had lost. People spoke more carefully around him. Some treated him as if he had become someone else. Alexander hated that feeling more than anything. Not because he needed sympathy, but because he had spent his entire life proving that he could handle anything. Now, sitting in his own wedding hall with an empty space beside him, he wondered if people had only valued him for what he could provide. When Alexander finally returned to his mansion, the place that once represented success felt strangely quiet. The staff members tried to remain professional, but he noticed the hesitation in their voices and the sadness in their expressions. He did not want their pity. He wanted to be seen as the same person he had always been. That evening, while looking out at the city lights from his room, Alexander heard a gentle knock at the door. It was Amelia Carter, one of the household maids. Many people overlooked Amelia because of her position and appearance. They saw a woman who worked behind the scenes, someone they believed had little influence. But Amelia carried herself with a quiet confidence that made her different. She entered with a calm expression and placed a cup of tea nearby. She did not offer empty words. She did not look at him with sadness. She simply treated him like a person. Alexander noticed the difference immediately. "You are not afraid to speak to me normally," he said. Amelia looked at him and replied softly, "Why would I? You are still you." The simple sentence stayed with him. For a man who had lost so much in one day, those words carried a meaning he could not explain. And that night, Alexander Blackwood began to realize that the person everyone ignored might be the one person who truly saw him. After the day that changed everything, Alexander Blackwood became a man surrounded by silence. The same mansion that once echoed with conversations, business meetings, and celebrations now felt like a place where every sound reminded him of what he had lost. The halls were still beautiful, the furniture was still expensive, and the city lights still shined beyond the windows, but none of it felt meaningful anymore. Alexander had spent his entire life building a world where he was always in control. Yet now, he found himself struggling with something money and influence could not solve. He was trying to understand who he was without the things that once defined him. The people around him treated him differently. Some were careful with every word. Some avoided conversations because they did not know how to act around him anymore. Alexander noticed everything. He always had. His ability to read people had helped him survive in a world where trust was rare. But now that same ability showed him something painful. Many people did not know how to see him beyond his condition. One morning, Amelia Carter entered the dining room while the staff prepared breakfast. She moved through the mansion with the same calm confidence she always had. Unlike everyone else, she did not change the way she spoke to Alexander. She did not become overly careful. She did not treat him like someone fragile. She simply continued treating him like the person she had always known. Alexander noticed as she placed his coffee on the table. "You always act as if nothing has changed," he said. Amelia looked at him calmly. "A lot has changed," she replied. "But that does not mean everything about you changed." Her answer caught him off guard. Most people focused on what he had lost. Amelia focused on what remained. Alexander looked away, unsure how to respond. He was used to people wanting something from him. Respect, protection, opportunities. But Amelia seemed to expect nothing. She was simply honest. Later that afternoon, Alexander watched from his office window as Amelia helped another employee organize supplies. She laughed softly during the conversation, making everyone around her feel comfortable. It was something Alexander rarely saw in his own world. People often approached him because of his reputation. Amelia connected with people because she valued them. That difference stayed in his mind. For the first time in months, Alexander began wondering whether he had spent too much time measuring people by their usefulness instead of their character. That evening, he found Amelia in the library arranging books. The room was quiet, filled with warm lighting and the scent of old pages. "Why do you treat everyone the same?" Alexander asked. Amelia paused and looked at him. "Because everyone has a story you do not know." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Alexander had always believed he understood people. Yet Amelia reminded him that understanding required more than observation. It required compassion. As the days passed, Alexander began noticing small things he had ignored before. The dedication of the staff, the kindness between people who had nothing to prove, the quiet strength of those who never received recognition. And at the center of all those lessons was Amelia, the woman many people overlooked. She never tried to change Alexander. She never demanded that he become someone else. She only reminded him that losing one part of his life did not mean losing his worth. For the first time since the wedding day, Alexander felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. And in a mansion filled with people who saw his past, Amelia was the first person who made him believe in his future. The transformation inside Alexander Blackwood's mansion did not happen overnight. There was no single moment when everything changed. Instead, it happened through quiet conversations, small observations, and moments that slowly challenged everything Alexander believed about people. For years, Alexander had lived in a world where everyone approached him carefully. Some respected his position. Some feared disappointing him. Some wanted to be connected to his success. But very few people ever took the time to understand the person behind the reputation. Amelia Carter was different. She never tried to impress him. She never acted differently because of his name. She treated him with the same kindness she showed everyone else, and that was something Alexander could not ignore. One afternoon, Alexander sat in the mansion library reviewing documents from his business. Before his accident, he would have spent hours making decisions without hesitation. He trusted his instincts and expected others to follow his direction. But now, every decision felt heavier. He wondered if people were listening because they respected him or because they felt obligated to agree. While he was lost in thought, Amelia entered the room carrying a stack of books. She noticed the serious expression on his face, but did not interrupt immediately. Instead, she quietly organized the shelves nearby. Alexander looked at her and asked, "Do you ever get tired of being overlooked?" Amelia stopped for a moment. She knew exactly what he meant. Many people saw her as only a maid. They noticed her uniform before they noticed her personality. They saw her position before they saw her abilities. But Amelia simply smiled. "Sometimes people only notice what they expect to see," she said. "That does not mean they are seeing the truth." Alexander thought about those words. They applied to her, but they also applied to him. People saw his wheelchair before they saw the man who had spent years building everything around him. They saw what had changed, not what remained. Later that week, Alexander attended a meeting with members of his company. Before his accident, he would have entered the room with complete confidence, expecting every decision to be accepted. This time, he listened more carefully. He asked questions. He considered ideas from people who usually stayed quiet. The change surprised everyone, including himself. After the meeting, one of his employees mentioned that it was the first time they felt their opinions truly mattered. Alexander did not respond immediately. Instead, he remembered something Amelia had said. "Everyone has a story you do not know." That evening, Alexander found Amelia in the garden behind the mansion. The sunset created a warm glow across the quiet landscape. For once, he was not thinking about business, reputation, or the expectations placed on him. He was simply having a conversation. "How did you learn to understand people so well?" Alexander asked. Amelia looked toward the flowers nearby before answering. "By knowing what it feels like when people do not try to understand you." Her response stayed with him. Alexander realized that Amelia's kindness did not come from having an easy life. It came from choosing compassion despite difficult experiences. She had every reason to become bitter, but she chose to remain gentle. And that choice made her stronger than many people with wealth and influence. As the evening ended, Alexander watched Amelia return to the mansion. For the first time, he did not see her as someone working beneath him. He saw her as someone who had taught him a lesson no amount of success could provide. The woman everyone overlooked had become the person who helped him see the world differently. And Alexander Blackwood was beginning to understand that the greatest changes often begin with the quietest voices. The days after Alexander Blackwood began changing were noticed by everyone inside the mansion, even though no one spoke about it openly. People who had known him for years understood that something was different. The man who once moved through every room with complete control now spent more time listening than speaking. The man who once believed answers came only from experience was beginning to understand that wisdom could come from unexpected places. But for Alexander, accepting change was not easy. He had spent his entire life building a reputation that protected him. His confidence had always been connected to his ability to handle every situation. Now, he was learning that true strength was not about never needing help. It was about having the courage to accept it. Amelia Carter continued her daily responsibilities without expecting recognition. She never reminded Alexander of the lessons she had taught him. She never acted as if she had changed his life. That humility was one of the reasons Alexander respected her more each day. One morning, while the mansion staff prepared for an important gathering, Alexander noticed Amelia helping organize the event. She moved calmly through the room, making sure everyone had what they needed. Some people barely noticed her efforts because they were used to seeing her in the background. But Alexander noticed. He saw the patience, the organization, and the kindness she brought into every task. "You make everything look effortless," Alexander said. Amelia smiled slightly. "Most things only look effortless because someone worked hard before anyone noticed." Her answer stayed in his mind. It reminded him of how many people had supported his success without ever standing in the spotlight. Later that day, Alexander attended a formal meeting at the mansion with several business partners. Before his accident, he would have focused only on results. He would have measured people by their achievements and efficiency. But this time, he watched how people interacted. He noticed who remained silent, who had ideas but hesitated to share them, and who deserved more appreciation than they received. When one employee offered a suggestion, Alexander did not dismiss it. Instead, he asked for more details and encouraged the conversation. The room became quieter for a moment because everyone noticed the difference. This was not the same man they had known before. After the meeting ended, Alexander remained in the room for a few minutes, thinking about how much he had overlooked in the past. That evening, he found Amelia near the garden entrance. The warm evening air surrounded the mansion, and the peaceful atmosphere felt different from the tension that had filled the house after his wedding day. "Do you ever wish people had seen your values sooner?" Alexander asked. Amelia looked thoughtful. "Everyone wants to be seen," she replied. "But sometimes the most important thing is knowing your own value before others recognize it." Alexander looked at her quietly. Those words reached deeper than she realized. For years, he had allowed other people's opinions to define his confidence. When people admired him, he felt powerful. When people walked away, he questioned himself. Amelia showed him another way. She proved that dignity did not disappear when circumstances changed. It remained because it came from within. As the weeks passed, Alexander continued to grow. He still faced difficult moments. He still had memories of the day he was left alone at his wedding. But those memories no longer controlled him. They became reminders of the person he was becoming. And slowly, the mansion that once felt like a place of loss became a place where healing began. The woman who everyone overlooked had become the person who helped the most powerful man in the room rediscover his humanity. The change in Alexander Blackwood continued quietly, but the people around him could no longer ignore it. The mansion that once felt like a place ruled by silence and authority had slowly become warmer. The staff noticed that Alexander no longer passed through the halls without acknowledging them. He asked questions. He listened to answers. He remembered small details that he once considered unimportant. For a man who had spent years believing that emotions were distractions, these simple actions represented a transformation no one expected. Yet the person who noticed the change most clearly was Amelia Carter. She never looked at Alexander as a different person because of his condition. She never measured him by what he could or could not do. She saw the same man who existed before the accident, even when he struggled to see that himself. One afternoon, Alexander sat in the mansion library reviewing old business records. The room was quiet except for the sound of pages turning. Amelia entered carrying a few books that needed to be returned to their shelves. As she walked across the room, Alexander looked up and said, "Do you ever wonder what people would think of you if they knew everything about your past?" Amelia paused before answering. "Everyone has parts of their story they keep private," she said. "But our past does not decide our worth." Alexander looked down at the documents in front of him. Those words made him think about his own journey. He had spent so much time worrying about how others viewed him that he forgot to ask himself what he truly believed about his own value. Later that week, Alexander attended a charity event connected to one of his companies. In the past, he would have viewed the event as another responsibility, something to complete because it affected his reputation. But this time, he paid attention to the people involved. He listened to their stories. He noticed the dedication of volunteers and the effort of employees who rarely received recognition. Amelia's influence was not changing him into someone else. It was helping him become someone he had forgotten how to be. During the event, Alexander noticed Amelia speaking with several guests. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply being herself. People naturally felt comfortable around her because she treated everyone with the same kindness. Alexander realized that this was a type of influence he had never possessed. He could command attention, but Amelia could create connection. That difference stayed with him. When they returned to the mansion that evening, Alexander found himself wanting to express something he had never said before. "Thank you," he told her. Amelia looked surprised. "For what?" Alexander thought carefully. "For reminding me that I am more than what happened to me." Amelia smiled gently. "You never stopped being that person. You just needed time to remember." The sentence remained with him long after the conversation ended. For years, Alexander had believed people respected him because of his position, his wealth, and his ability to provide protection. But Amelia showed him a different truth. The most meaningful respect came from being understood. It came from kindness given without expectation. It came from people who saw your heart before they saw your circumstances. As the night settled over the mansion, Alexander looked out at the city lights and realized something important. Losing one part of his life had forced him to discover another part he had ignored for years. And the person who helped him find that hidden strength was the woman many others never bothered to notice. The quiet transformation of Alexander Blackwood had reached a point where even the people closest to him could feel the difference. It was not a dramatic change that happened overnight. It was built through small decisions, thoughtful conversations, and moments when Alexander chose understanding over control. The man who once believed he had to carry every burden alone was beginning to recognize the strength that came from allowing others to stand beside him. Inside the Whitmore mansion, the atmosphere had changed completely. The staff no longer felt like they were simply following orders from a powerful man. They felt like they were part of a place where their voices mattered. Alexander noticed the difference every day, and he knew exactly who had helped him see it. Amelia Carter never asked for credit. She never reminded him that she was the reason he had started looking at the world differently. Her kindness was never a performance. It was simply who she was. One morning, Alexander found Amelia in the garden arranging flowers near the walkway. The sunlight reflected across the quiet landscape, creating a peaceful scene that felt far away from the complicated world he once lived in. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You always seem to find something good in every situation," he said. Amelia looked at him with a gentle smile. "Not every situation is good," she replied. "But every situation can teach us something." Alexander thought about those words. Before his accident, he believed lessons came from success. He believed winning was the only proof that he was moving forward. But now he understood that some of the most important lessons came from moments when life did not go according to plan. Later that week, Alexander received an invitation to attend a formal gathering with influential people from his business world. In the past, he would have focused only on appearances. He would have worried about how others viewed him and whether they still respected his position. This time, he approached the event differently. He did not try to hide his challenges. He did not allow other people's opinions to define him. When conversations began, Alexander spoke with confidence, but he also listened. He shared ideas, asked questions, and treated everyone around him with genuine respect. Several guests noticed the difference. They had expected the same distant and intimidating man they remembered. Instead, they met someone calmer, more thoughtful, and more connected to the people around him. After the event, Alexander sat quietly in his car while looking at the city outside the window. He realized that the world had not actually changed as much as he thought. What changed was the way he saw it. When he returned to the mansion, Amelia was waiting in the hallway with a small smile. "How was your evening?" she asked. Alexander answered honestly. "Different." Amelia nodded. "Different can be a good thing." He smiled because he understood what she meant. The old Alexander would have measured the night by how much influence he gained. The new Alexander measured it by how much he had learned. That night, he returned to the same home that once represented everything he had lost. But now, it represented something else. It represented growth, understanding, and the possibility of a future he had never imagined. Alexander Blackwood had spent years building walls around himself to protect his heart. Amelia Carter never tried to break those walls down. She simply showed him that he no longer needed them. And for the first time in a long time, Alexander felt free to become the person he was always meant to be. The changes in Alexander Blackwood had become impossible to hide. The people who had known him for years began noticing that the man who once carried himself with distance and authority now carried something different. There was patience in his words. There was appreciation in his actions. He was still the same powerful man with the same responsibilities, but the cold barrier that once separated him from everyone else was slowly disappearing. Inside the mansion, conversations that were once brief and formal became warmer. Employees who once hesitated before speaking now felt comfortable sharing their thoughts. Alexander did not see this as a loss of control. Instead, he realized it was something he had never experienced before: genuine connection. Amelia Carter watched the transformation quietly. She never expected Alexander to change because of her. She believed people only changed when they discovered the reason within themselves. Her role was simply to remind him of something he had forgotten. One afternoon, Alexander noticed Amelia organizing a small gathering for the household staff. She carefully prepared everything, making sure every person felt included. Alexander watched as she remembered small details about people's lives, asking about their families and showing appreciation for their efforts. It was a simple act, but to Alexander, it revealed something important. Amelia understood something he had ignored for years. People did not only need instructions, they needed to feel valued. "How do you remember so much about everyone?" Alexander asked. Amelia looked at him with a gentle smile. "Because people remember when someone takes the time to notice them." Her answer stayed with him throughout the day. Alexander thought about all the people who had supported him over the years. Employees who worked late. People who helped maintain his success. Individuals who contributed to his achievements without ever receiving recognition. He wondered how. Many stories he had missed because he was always focused on the final result. Later that week, Alexander attended a private business meeting with several longtime associates. In the past, he would have entered the room expecting everyone to follow his direction. This time, he approached the conversation differently. He listened before responding. He considered different opinions. He gave attention to people who were usually ignored. Some of the attendees were surprised by the change. They remembered Alexander as someone who valued efficiency above everything else. Now, they saw a leader who understood that respect was not created by demanding attention. It was created by giving attention. After the meeting, one of his associates commented on how different he seemed. Alexander simply replied, "Maybe I am finally seeing things clearly." That evening, Alexander returned to the mansion and found Amelia in the library. The quiet room reminded him of all the conversations that had changed his perspective. "Do you think people can really change?" he asked. Amelia closed the book in her hands and answered, "People change when they are brave enough to admit they still have something to learn." Alexander smiled slightly. Those words described his journey perfectly. He had spent years believing that knowledge came from experience and power. But Amelia showed him that wisdom also came from humility. As the night settled around the mansion, Alexander looked around at the place that once represented loneliness. Now, it represented something completely different. It represented growth, understanding, and the people who helped him become better. And among all those lessons, one truth remained clear. The person everyone underestimated had become the person who revealed the greatest strength of all, the ability to see the humanity in others. The world around Alexander Blackwood continued to change, but the greatest transformation was happening inside him. The man who once believed his value came from being untouchable was learning that true strength came from accepting every part of himself. His journey had never been about proving he could return to the person he was before. It was about discovering the person he could become after everything changed. Inside the Whitmore mansion, Alexander no longer moved through the halls like someone separated from everyone else. He greeted employees by name. He asked about their lives. He listened to their experiences. These small gestures seemed ordinary to others, but for Alexander, they represented a completely different way of living. Amelia Carter noticed the difference, but she also noticed something else. Alexander was no longer changing because he wanted to impress anyone. He was changing because he finally understood the importance of treating people with genuine respect. One evening, the mansion hosted a private dinner with several important guests from Alexander's business circle. Many of them had known him before the accident and remembered the man who always appeared confident and impossible to challenge. As they arrived, some guests were unsure how to approach him. They expected the same distant personality they had always known. But Alexander surprised them. He welcomed everyone warmly and made sure the conversation included people who were usually overlooked. During the dinner, one guest mentioned how unusual it was to see such a powerful person spending so much time listening to others. Alexander simply smiled and replied, "I spent years believing people respected me because of what I had. I am learning that respect comes from how you treat people." The room became quiet for a moment. It was not a dramatic statement, but it carried the weight of someone who had experienced a major change. Amelia watched from a distance, quietly proud of the person Alexander was becoming. Later that night, Alexander found her near the library window. The city lights reflected across the glass, creating a peaceful atmosphere. "Do you remember the first time we spoke?" Alexander asked. Amelia smiled. "Yes, you look like someone who had forgotten how to believe in himself." Alexander laughed softly. It was a rare sound from a man who had spent years being serious. "And what do I look like now?" Amelia thought for a moment before answering. "Like someone who understands that being human is not a weakness." Her words stayed with him. For years, Alexander had surrounded himself with people who admired his success but rarely challenged his perspective. Amelia never tried to change him through criticism. She changed his life by showing him another way to see the world. She reminded him that kindness was not a sign of weakness. Listening was not a loss of authority. Accepting help was not failure. Those lessons became the foundation of the person Alexander was becoming. As the evening ended, Alexander looked across the mansion and realized how different everything felt. The same walls that once reminded him of what he lost now reminded him of what he gained. He gained understanding. He gained connection. He gained a new purpose. And the person who helped him discover that purpose was the woman many people had ignored because they never took the time to truly see her. Amelia Carter never needed power to make a difference. She only needed compassion. And that was the lesson Alexander Blackwood would carry with him for the rest of his life. The morning sun entered the Whitmore mansion with a warmth that felt completely different from the days when Alexander Blackwood first returned home. The same halls that once carried the weight of disappointment and silence now carried conversations, laughter, and a sense of belonging. Alexander stood near the large windows overlooking the garden, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had once believed that losing his ability to walk meant losing the life he had built. He thought respect came from being feared, admired, and powerful. But the months that followed taught him something far more valuable. His greatest loss had revealed the parts of himself he had never taken the time to understand. The most important change was not how others saw him. It was how he finally learned to see himself. Amelia Carter continued her work in the mansion, still carrying the same kindness and confidence she had always shown. She never treated Alexander like a different person because of his circumstances. She never viewed him as someone who needed to be fixed. Instead, she reminded him that he was already complete. One afternoon, Alexander organized a gathering for everyone who worked at the mansion. In the past, he would have viewed such an event as unnecessary. He would have focused only on schedules, responsibilities, and results. But this time, he wanted something different. He wanted the people around him to know they mattered. As everyone gathered, Alexander stood before them and spoke honestly. He thanked them for their dedication and admitted that he had spent many years seeing only the work they provided instead of the people they were. The room became quiet as everyone listened. It was not the speech of a man trying to maintain an image. It was the voice of someone who had finally learned humility. Amelia watched from the side, knowing that Alexander's words were sincere. He was no longer trying to prove he was strong. He had already discovered a deeper kind of strength. Later that evening, Alexander and Amelia walked through the garden, where they had shared many meaningful conversations. The peaceful surroundings reminded them of how much had changed. "You know," Alexander said, "when everything happened, I thought my life was over." Amelia looked at him calmly. Sometimes the end of one chapter is where we finally begin to understand the story. Alexander smiled. He realized that the person who had helped him through his darkest moments was someone many people had ignored because they judged her by her position. But Amelia had never needed wealth or influence to make an impact. Her strength came from compassion, patience, and the way she treated every person with dignity. Over time, people throughout the city began noticing the difference in Alexander Blackwood. He was still a respected businessman. He was still a powerful figure. But now, people respected him for reasons beyond his reputation. They respected his character. They respected his willingness to listen. They respected the kindness he showed to others. And Alexander knew exactly where that change began. It began with a simple conversation with a woman who saw him when he felt invisible. Amelia Carter never gave him back the life he had before. She gave him something better. She helped him discover a life built on understanding, connection, and genuine respect. In the end, Alexander learned that a person's value is never measured by what they lose. It is measured by the humanity they continue to carry. And in that quiet mansion where everything once felt broken, two people from completely different worlds proved that dignity has no limits.